As some of you may know, John and I have recently become grandparents. We now have a 2.5-year-old grandson. Now, mind you, when I grew up, I didn't have any relationship to my grandparents, hardly at all. I mean, they lived across the country or way down south. I almost never saw them. So when I found out I was going to be a grandparent, it was like, oh my God, how do I do that? I don't know. Yikes. Now let's talk about John. So John had a lovely grandfather, but lost him when John was 3. And his grandmother actually lived with the family, with his parents, him and his sister, for, 25 years. But she was nice to John and not nice to anybody else. I think she had a preference for boys over women or something. I don't know. She wasn't nice to John's mother. She wasn't nice to John's sister. So he didn't really have great role models for grandparenting either. So there we are, the two of us, there we were. And we have this gorgeous, beautiful grandson who is the most active child in the universe. Oh my God. So here are me and John. We're 73. I'm 73. John is 82. Okay. So what do we do as grandparents? Well, there were several things we had to do that became really important. Number one, zip it. We've got to keep our mouths shut. When mom and dad of this little grandson are doing something that is a little different than we might do ourselves, that maybe doesn't look like the greatest idea, we don't say a word. And believe me, that is really tough. I love being bossy and telling people what to do. So I had to shut up and not say a word, look at John. He knew what I was thinking. I knew what he was thinking. And there was silence as the kids did. Our kids, that means our daughter and our son-in-law did what they felt was right. We had to support that as best we could or just stay quiet. Another thing that's really important about being a good grandparent is listening to our kids. Instead of trying to solve their problems, when they're stressed out, we need to listen to them as they're talking about their child, right? So we emotionally support them by being empathetic, by saying, oh, God, that sounds really hard, or saying, you must have been so mad about that. Whatever their feelings are regarding their child, you don't want to solve the problems for them unless they ask you for advice. If they say, what would you do in this situation? Fine. Give them your own ideas. But if they don't, just empathize with how they're feeling. And another really important thing is, just like we do in romantic relationships, catch the parents doing things right and give them some praise for it. Tell them, wow, you handled that situation so well. I really like how you set limits there. In other words, you're seeing what your kids are doing right, especially if it's a first child for them, where they're nervous about doing things right, and you give them respect. You give them appreciation. You give them positive feedback, not criticism, but positive feedback that bolsters their confidence and makes them feel better about their role as a parent. Now, what happens if you see them doing something that's really not okay? Well, you're first of all not going to talk about it in front of the child at all. And what I like to do as a grandma, let's say my daughter, um, I don't know, she doesn't do this ordinarily, but I'm making it up. She lets our grandson hit her, and he's 2.5, and she doesn't do anything about it. Okay. Well, I might pull her aside and I might say, honey, he was hitting you, right? Yes. Help me understand how come you kind of let that go and didn't try to say something about it. Help me understand that. So notice, I'm not criticizing. What I'm doing is asking a question of her to understand what was going on for her at that point. Now, who knows? It could be that, she just came off a 16-hour double shift and she's absolutely exhausted. She doesn't have the energy to deal with setting a limit at that moment. She really wanted her husband to take over, and eventually she called him in to do so, which is another way of handling a situation like that where your child is doing something that's not so good and you need to set limits, but you don't have the energy to, or the patience to. Call in a partner, or you could even call in grandma or grandpa. That's fine. They too can set limits once they have built a good, trusting relationship with the child. Another thing that's great for grandparents to do is just play. Let your child's sense of playfulness, of what's really fun to do, be contagious so that you catch it. Let's say you're taking your grandchild to a playground. Well, go down the slide if you are able to. Climb up the ladder if you're able to. Go run around the field with your child and grandchild if you're able to. Really showing your child and grandchild that you're with them 100% is a beautiful way to be a good grandparent. And last but not least, try your very best. When your kids need help, then go help. Drop everything else if possible and go help. I remember, I think it was when our little grandson was about, I don't know, maybe a month old, 4 weeks old, something like that. And both mom and dad, my daughter and son-in-law, got horribly sick. They got a terrible flu. And they didn't want to give it to the grandchild. So my poor daughter called me up and said, Mom, I feel really horrible. Can you please come over? And I did. And I ended up having to be up all night with that child, as you would with a month-old who isn't sleeping through the night. But, I think my really deep bonding with our grandson started that night, when I could hold him, comfort him, give him some milk, and just be there for him all day and all night until mom and dad began to feel better. So do your very best to really support mom and dad and play and have a wonderful time with that grandchild of yours.